Hi everyone, welcome to Things Lucy Reads. I'm Luce and this is my Merlin Readathon wrap-up video. So I did eventually get through all of the 4 books that I had on my TBR for this readathon, but I don't know if I can really claim the level of mage because I would be lying if I said I read them in order. I did not. And I also didn't actually finish the last book that I finished until a day or two after the readathon had ended. In my defense, we went into lockdown, like actual lockdown, partway through the readathon, and then that kind of messed with everything. The first book that was on my TBR was the comic volume The Once and Future Queen by Adam P. Nave and someone Kirkbride. And this is volume 1, which is called Opening Moves. So in my TBR, I think that I said it was set in the UK and that the main character was black. I was wrong about that. And I also said that it had an FF relationship in it. I was only partially right about that. It is set partially in Portland and partially in the UK. There are these standing stones that act as a portal between the two places, so it is set half in each side of the planet. The main character Rani, who is the Arthur equivalent, she is half white, half Indian actually, she's not black, and she is in a bit of a relationship with Gwen, but then they also start a bit of a thing with Lance, so it's actually an FFM polyamorous relationship, and Lancelot was asexual, which was great. And this was published a really long time ago, like even before Every Heart a Doorway, and I feel like if I had read it back then when it was published, it would have been revolutionary for me because it explicitly has commentary about how being asexual doesn't mean that you don't want a romantic relationship, which I think is a thing that people struggle with even now. So that part of it was really good. Everything to do with the queer rep was amazing, but I just didn't really feel anything ultimately. It was a really fun ride. I don't know. I feel like a little more time introducing the characters and letting us get to know them would have been better. But then there was so much happening in this volume that there was no time to spare to introduce any of that because you had to introduce everything else that was happening, and I just... Maybe if this part of the story had been told over 2 volumes, it would have been better. It would have had a little more room to grow, but unfortunately it was not. And so while this was not an unenjoyable read, it didn't really grab me and it didn't really do anything for me, unfortunately. So I have given it 3 stars. I don't think it was ever continued anyway, but if it had been, I don't know if I would buy the next volume. But the next volume doesn't exist anyway, so it is what it is. And then the next book that I started was Lost in a Book by Jennifer Donnelly, which is a tie-in for Beauty and the Beast. I actually put this down halfway through and this ended up being the last book that I finished. I actually really adored this book. I rated it a 5 stars on Goodreads. I nearly only gave it a 4, but I just loved everything that it did so much that I decided I had to give it a 5. What this book does mostly is it fills in the gaps in characterization that the movie doesn't have time to do more than imply. So it's implied that Belle and the Beast become good friends, that the Beast starts softening up, that they both start opening up to each other, and then they fall in love. But in this book, you actually see it happening. You see them both dropping their walls and opening up to each other and becoming friends and caring about each other and doing things for each other. Unfortunately, the events in this book and the things that happen don't line up perfectly with the film. There are some inconsistencies. So like I thought that this was Belle having another adventure in the book that the Enchantress had left for the Beast that let them go to Paris. And it was sort of that kind of thing. But for all intents and purposes in this book, that magic book doesn't exist. And the magic book in this book is a completely different one. And the other thing, so there's a joke in the movie, which I absolutely love, where Gaston says to LeFou, she's the only girl that gives me that sense of, and then trails off, and LeFou goes, je ne sais quoi, and Gaston goes, I don't know what that means, which is a joke because je ne sais quoi means I don't know what. That's what it means, literally. So, like, it's a funny pun, but also this movie is set in France and these characters are French. It doesn't make sense that Gaston doesn't know what je ne sais quoi means. Of course he knows, he is French. And similarly to that, in this book, one of the characters who was driving the whole thing was Death, but she was in disguise, and she called herself a title in French, which I'm going to absolutely butcher if I try to pronounce it, but it means Countess of the Land of the Dead, but in French. And there's no way that Belle, as a French woman, wouldn't immediately know that that's what that means and be immediately suspicious of the Countess of the Land of the Dead. Other than that, I adored it because, let me just read you what I wrote on Goodreads. Messages in this book: that love is sometimes hard and painful, that friendships take work, that the easy way out isn't all it's cracked up to be, that you can still choose to be a good person despite the fact that you've done the wrong thing in the past, that kindness matters, are so incredibly important, and I'm honestly just stoked that this book exists and will teach that to kids. And that pretty much sums up my whole feelings about this. I didn't have super high expectations going in. I expected it to be maybe a 3-star read, and then it just absolutely knocked it out of the park. And I don't know if I will ever reread it, but I am going to hold on to it for a little bit because I just really did love it a lot. And then the next book that I started reading, and it was also the second one that I finished, was The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water by Zen Cho. So this is about a group of bandits who are on the tail end of a job and they've got some loot and they're trying to sell it. And this nun comes into their lives and decides that she's going to join their group and go along with them on their quest. And then when she finds out what the quest is, sort of disrupts it a little bit. And in so disrupting it, finds out that she has a connection with one of the bandits that she hadn't previously considered. And it turns out to be really important, and ends up being the key to her being able to fix this disruption that she has caused. For such a short book, it contained such an incredible story, and I wish that it had been 100 pages longer because I just loved the world that Zen Cho set up and I loved the characters, and I would happily read many, many more books about the adventures of Guit Im and Tet Sung, and I really wish that they existed. But I absolutely adored this. I gave it 4 stars just because I felt like it could have benefited from being just a little bit longer, but ultimately I really, really, really enjoyed it. I can't tell you much more about it because it is such a short story, and to go into any more detail will be spoilery. Definitely pick this up. Tet Sung especially is a really interesting character. It would not be incorrect to call him trans, but it was just really, really good. If you're thinking about picking it up, please, please do. It was really, really enjoyable, and I will definitely be revisiting this one in the future again. And then the last book on my TBR, I'm also not going to have that much to say about, and it is Through the Woods by Emily Carroll, which I read for my Big Mac TBR and also for this readathon. This was a reread for me. I had read it once before. I think reading it this time around, I had a better understanding of the stories. I knew that it was going to be a collection of short stories and not one whole narrative, so I was less confused. And I chose this for the prompt. Oh, right, so my prompts for this readathon, for the first one was read an Arthurian retelling, which was for Once and Future Queen, and then it was read a book with gold foil on it, which this does have, and then read a book with less than 250 pages, and then read a scary book, which I chose this one for. It's not exactly scary, it's more like chilling, but it was really, really good. The art is beautiful, the colour palettes are also gorgeous. Even though all of the stories are so short, they pack a real punch. I rated it a 4 stars, which is also what I gave it last time, just because even though it was really enjoyable and really beautiful, it wasn't necessarily groundbreaking in any way, but it was really good, and I will definitely be picking up her work again in the future, and I definitely also recommend it if you've been thinking about reading this. One of the characters in one of these stories is disabled and she wears a leg brace. It is mentioned that that could be miraculously fixed at one point, but she doesn't go for it, and I feel like that's important to know. So those are the 4 books that I read for this readathon. If you've read any of them and you would like to let me know what you thought, feel free to do so in a comment down below. If you just want to leave me an emoji to let me know that you were here, feel free to do that as well. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye for now.